Modern horse racing industry started roughly in about 1750.
It's the second widest spectator sport in the world.
Of course, the industry's grown much bigger, and now we have thousands of horses racing every
Horse
year.
racing welfare is huge at the
But
moment.
we believe out of all proportions.
Anyone who's involved in racing will know that racehorses have a great life.
What we're doing actually to these animals is racing them to their deaths.
And it's an inherent love of the animal, that's why they do it.
We believe it's fundamentally, inherently exploitative of the horses that it uses.
They're fit, they're healthy, and they've got a great purpose in life.
They feel love, they suffer, feel pain, feel sad.
The fatality rate for British racing for 2019 was 0.19%. That's the lowest it's ever been.
Animals don't get a thrill from crossing the finish line.
They are the most engaging animal in the world.
Humans have obviously raced horses in one form or another for thousands of years. Horse racing, as we know now in the UK, you could trace it right back to the 17th century. Charles II in Newmarket was the first person to race horses in inverted commas in the way that we would know today. The racing industry as it stands in 2020 has evolved a lot in quite a short space of time, and it's a pretty significant industry. It contributes about £3.5 billion a year to the UK economy. It employs around about 18,000 people in full-time jobs, and there is indirect employment of about 90,000 people if you take in the industries which depend on racing in one form or another. As the governing body and regulator, the British Horse Racing Authority has a pretty wide remit. We both have to regulate the sport from an independent standpoint, so that's anything from equine welfare to ensuring the rules around anti-doping or potential corruption, or the welfare of our human participants, safeguarding any of those key issues, and a whole variety of other matters as well. So it's a pretty big industry. Racing is the second largest attended sport in the country. And it has a very rich history and tradition, but it's changed a lot in quite a short space of time in the way the industry is structured and the way that the BHA sits at the top of that industry. Within racing, equine welfare is probably the hottest topic and has been for a couple of years. It's one which the racing industry itself and those people looking outside it, both from a public perspective and from a political perspective, have been very, very hot on. And I think if you place the racing kind of welfare discussion in the context of the wider societal changes towards how humans interact with animals, it's a very, very good example, we feel, of how an industry can stay ahead of the curve of public perception and stay ahead of the curve of changing attitudes. So I mean, within racing, it's the topic which gets discussed more than any other, but I think racing's a pretty high profile sport, particularly on those big days, whether that's the Cheltenham Festival or the Grand National or any others. And equine welfare is never far away from the list of topics for discussion around those big sporting events. When horses race, there is always going to be a level of risk attached to that. And we have a strong track record in reducing that risk. The fatality rate for British racing for 2019 was 0.19%. That's the lowest it's ever been. And that's been lowered by a third over the last 30 years or so. But the reality is that we will always strive to make that number as low as it possibly can be. And a kind of key recent example of that is the welfare strategy. And it looks at the entire life cycle of the thoroughbred racehorse and trying to ensure that they are as well cared for as they possibly can be. And it's an incredibly ambitious piece of work. There are in the region of 25 separate projects over the next 5 years which are going to take place with an unprecedented level of data analysis and research and advancement in technology to ensure that British racing remains as a world leader in terms of how our racehorses are cared for. And the next 5 years with the publishing of this strategy will see us go further and faster in terms of protecting the welfare of racehorses than ever before.
Pizza UK has been working on horse racing for a very long time. We are an animal rights campaigning organization, so we will speak out against any industry that abuses or exploits animals, and of course we speak out against horse racing. The horse racing industry as a whole is extremely cruel, is extremely exploitative and abusive to animals. What we're doing actually to these animals is racing them to their deaths. Whenever there's money involved, it's an industry that sees animals as commodities. It has nothing to do with animal lovers. The racing industry always says that they are animal lovers. They are not. In which other industry do you see animals dying and continuing to claim that we are animal lovers, that's why we are doing this? It's all about the money and nothing else. The minor changes that are made every year are just token gestures. They do very little to actually improve animal welfare. The only way to help animals from suffering fatalities, injuries on the race course is to just stop doing it altogether. Every single year we see animals injured or dying on the race course, and that's only a part of the racing industry as a whole. We're also talking about all the animals who are bred. Lots of breeders churn out foals every single year. About 13,000 foals are bred in the UK every single year in the hope that they'll be winners. But of course, not all of them are winners. Not all of them even make it on a racetrack. So what happens to all the rest? We know that about 5,000 foals, well, they face an uncertain fate. Some of them are abandoned, or they're just neglected, or they end up in slaughterhouses. And it's also about all the horses who are no longer winning or who are retired. We see so many of them ending up in the slaughterhouses. About 1,000 race horses are sent to the slaughterhouse every single year. It's a vile industry and it needs to end.
I'm Dean Stansell, the horse racing consultant for Animal Aid, and I've been their horse consultant for 20 years. The modern horse racing industry started roughly in about 1750, and now we have thousands of horses racing every year, a breeding industry. So it's a big £1 billion industry that exists at the present day that's grown, that we believe, out of all proportions. Animal Aid do not support horse racing. We believe it's fundamentally, inherently exploitative of the horses that it uses, from unregulated breeding practices through to the dangers of horses racing on race courses, to the training regimes where horses are killed as well, and also to the provision for horses who leave racing. We believe there's major problems there as well. So it's a fourfold problem that we believe horses face, that the industry hasn't addressed. So we think there needs to be an independent welfare regulator for horse racing so that improvements can really be made on a big scale. The British Horse Racing Authority decided to create the Horse Welfare Board, and that came about because of Animal Aid's campaigning. They've come up with a 5-year plan, but sadly we feel that plan hasn't gone far enough that will make real changes, pragmatic changes for horses in racing. A lot of it is about a lot of reviews and consultation processes, and that's going to take time, and in the meantime horses are going to die while we wait for the results of those, and even those may not be conclusive in bringing about positive change. Far too many horses are bred, far more horses are bred than will ever race or for what there is owners for, and because there's so many horses being bred, it's easy to get, if I'm an owner and my horse isn't very successful, I can get rid of that horse and soon pick up another cheap horse to race in its place. And I'm personally have rehomed many horses who've been kicked out of the industry at a very early age because they weren't winning enough or because the owners no longer wanted to bother with them. So yeah, major problems that the industry's got to get to grips with. Devil's Bite is his racing name, and this horse was called Barton Legend. And I took them in because they basically had nowhere else to go. Devils could have been bought by, say, meat men and been slaughtered, and Barney certainly would have been shot because he couldn't be ridden, and very few people want to take on horses who can't be ridden. But we've given him a home for life, as we have Devils. When Animal Aid first started a dedicated campaign to help racehorses 20 years ago, we found there was a lack of knowledge within the general public about the racing industry. The racing industry had had a blank sheet for years and years to say whatever they wanted, that racehorses were treated like kings and they led great lives and they're well fed and well looked after. Deaths weren't discussed in racing. We record all the horses that we know of that die on racecourses, and that's now running into thousands of horses that have been killed since 2007. That's something the industry did not want the public to know. Now we've exposed that, and now the industry have to address that issue of horses dying on racecourses. Because if they don't, they lose public support. We reflect a lot of public opinion. So with regard to, say, the use of the whip, the vast majority of the public don't want to see horses whipped in racing. And we're really carrying that message that the public feel to politicians, to the media, and of course to the industry. Now, whether or not the industry want to listen or not is up to them.
My name's Richard Phillips. I'm a racehorse trainer. I've been training racehorses for 27 years, and it takes up all my life. The great thing about racing is it attracts so many different people into the racing world, and it doesn't matter what age and what job or profession you have, there's so many people throughout Britain that have got a huge interest in horse racing. I think racehorses are probably treated better than humans. They're all on Bupa, and they don't have to queue for 4 hours at A&E. They have the most wonderful life in that respect. A racehorse would be exercised literally every day. They'd be fed with a top diet, and they'd be monitored throughout the day and throughout the night. So I think they've probably got a better life than many humans, in the fact that they're fit, they're healthy, and they've got a great purpose in life. I think where we can improve is basically having a register of what happens to horses once they leave racing. So once we've got horses into the world, as it were, as foals, and they're registered, they have a career in racing, and I think the general public would like to know, and as we would all would like to know, is where the horses go once they've left racing, because they have a great career once they're in racing. And we're very, very, very conscious in racing to make sure that once they've left the sport, they go on and have a very decent life afterwards. So I think there are lots of things being done now to make sure, with the rehabilitation of racehorses and the charity that helps with all that, that from now on I think we've made a lot of progress in making sure that these horses are actually registered and we know where they go to once they've left the racing world. I think the sport can basically help the public understand the sport more by being more open about it. I think anyone who's involved in racing will know that racehorses have a great life. And those fans of racing, there are millions in Britain, have had some sort of insight, but we're proposing hopefully in racing to have a National Racehorse Day, so that's to celebrate the horse. It's an incredibly popular animal in Britain. We have a huge history, from the Queen to many celebrities in our world. Dame Judi Dench, Anton Deck, all racehorse owners, and they wouldn't be racehorse owners unless they thought that racing was ethical. So I think we need to get out to the public more just how good a life a racehorse has, what it does to rural economies. It supports a lot of people, gives lots of people lots of jobs, and also through amazing charities that racing do. It's incredible how horses can help society just by getting young people or old people to engage with a racehorse, because they are the most engaging animal in the world.